I go on quite a few job interviews, and I have to wonder sometimes if I dodged a bullet by not getting the job. About 2 weeks ago, I went on an interview with a pharmacy in Bedford Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, and the commute was 90 minutes. I had to take a D train from the Bronx all the way down to about Broadway Lafayette, where I caught an M train, and I rode that M train all the way to Myrtle Avenue to go to this interview, and that took about 90 minutes. Um, After I got out on Myrtle Avenue, I walked down to Broadway and I went to do this interview. And I didn't think much of the neighborhood I was going into. And I did this interview. The interview was about 2 or 3 minutes. Went back on the train. Again, did not think much of this interview or this neighborhood. Fast forward to last night. I'm watching the Channel 11 news at 10 o'clock. And Jay Dow was doing a report. And what is he talking about? The very same neighborhood I went to go do this job interview at 2 weeks ago. And what do they call the neighborhood? They call it K2 Alley. What is K2? K2 is this synthetic marijuana that a lot of people like to smoke to get high when they can't get real weed. And some people prefer it over real weed because it gives them a better trip, as some of them say. And in K2 alleys, like they had in Harlem about a year ago, what happens is people are laying out on the street, strung out, high off of this stuff, going on trips, and some of them are just going crazy. Um, and turns out yesterday, almost 33 people were strung out on K2 in this K2 alley. And I think about that and I said, that would be a crazy situation for me to wind up in, having to work in that type of area. Having to take a 90-minute commute all the way down to Brooklyn to get this job, and then have to come out in the afternoons to find myself having to deal with a K2 alley filled with drug addicts, pretty much laid out high off of this synthetic marijuana, going on bad trips, and pretty much putting my own health and safety and my own life in danger. I think about that and I wonder, yeah, I probably dodged a bullet by not getting that job, because having to walk the 2 or 3 blocks down to that Myrtle Avenue train station back and forth, that would be a scary situation to deal with when you have to deal with a K2 alley. Now, some people are saying, oh, they're going to bring police, and that's what they had on the report. There's going to be an increased police presence, but that's only going to be temporary. When I've seen these type of, because I had to deal with this type of neighborhood back in the day when me and my family member, we would go to a path mark on 125th Street. We would see these drug addicts pretty much strung out on heroin and other drugs, standing around this path mark, pretty much making the place miserable and untenable. It got to the point where me and my family member got so disgusted with that 125th Street path mark, we just decided to stop shopping there, and we went to move on to the 145th Street path mark to get away from these drug addicts and the horrors and the havoc that they bring. But I think about having to go through that commute, and I have to say to myself, thank God I didn't get this job, because that would be dodging a bullet, because having to go through that would be a nightmare every day, having to deal with a K2 alley, an alley filled with drug addicts, and heaven help me if I were to run into one who had a bad trip or had just gone crazy off of these drugs. And I was watching the J. Dow report, and he was pretty, thorough in his report. He not only showed you the black males, who were 33 of them, pretty much laid out from these K2. He pretty much pointed at the source of all of this havoc and mayhem in the neighborhood. He pointed out that most of these people were getting these drugs from an Arabone store in the neighborhood. Now, the Arabone store pretty much was trying to deny it, but we all know what they sell in these stores. These stores, again, in addition to the bad food that they sell black people in these neighborhoods, they sell them this K2. And they will sell it with no problem, because back on 125th Street, where they had the path mark, right across the street, where they were selling the K2, was an Arabone store. These Arabone stores pretty much, this is what they do. They will sell this stuff to black people, and then they will go out and have these bad trips on the street. But on 125th Street, there were white people taking this stuff too. So that the people they go to these Arab-owned stores and they get this K2, and then they go get high, and then everybody has to deal with it. And the even crazier thing that J. Dow put in his report was he showed one of these hipster white guys getting all upset, talking about how everything was going to bring down his property values and how the neighborhood was going to fall apart. And I'm like sitting there going, dude, you are totally clueless to what's going on. You're looking at this black man who's getting high off of these K2, but you're not looking at the source, which is this Arab-owned store. And you don't see how this Arab-owned store is bringing down your property values and tearing down the community, because if there was no Arab-owned store to sell this man this K2, this man would probably have to go someplace else to get whatever he was looking for. And this was in the middle of J. Dow's report. He was trying to interview this guy. He was about my age, and he was a K2 user. But this white guy comes along. He's getting all upset, and he's getting angry at the black man. And it showed me, the cognitive distortion that many of these white males have regarding, black people. And he's looking at the black man who was high on the drugs, but he's not looking at the Arab-owned store, which is selling this man these drugs, and pretty much, bringing down the quality of life in the neighborhood and bringing down the community overall. This is the big issue that is a big problem when it comes down to this whole K2 situation. Everybody's looking at the drug addicts, but nobody's looking at the dealer, which is the Arab-owned store, which is selling this synthetic marijuana to people and pretty much bringing this havoc to the community. But when I look at that whole situation that was on that Channel 11 news report, I say to myself, I thank God that maybe I didn't get that job, because, again, that would have been a nightmare to deal with, having to deal with a 3-hour commute, 90 minutes going and 90 minutes coming back, on taking 2 trains to go get a part-time job, because that's what they told me it was, and then having to deal with that nightmare, and then having to deal with a K2 alley. And sometimes, because a lot of times I say to myself, because that was an interview I did fairly well on, and I look at that and I go, it was a job I actually kind of wanted, because it was something I've been doing right now with eBay and postage, so I understand how that worked and what they wanted me to do. So I really would have wanted that job, but I look at it now and I look at the neighborhood, I look at the situation, and again, I say to myself, I believe I seriously dodged a bullet by not getting this job and not getting this job offer, because having to deal with a 3-hour commute all the way from the Bronx to Brooklyn every day, and then having to deal with a K2 alley filled with drug addicts and dusty Negroes pretty much either begging you for change or trying to attack you, that would be a horrible situation for anyone to deal with. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.